I thicken the mix a touch to work on the mid-tone areas a bit more. This is where the grapes really start to take 3D form as their whole tonal range has been painted.
Hi, it's Annamason. Welcome to this episode of Nature Studio TV, here to help you become the artist you want to be. In this class, I'm going to show you a demo of how I painted these grapes covered in their characteristic powdery bloom. Here, I'll walk you through how to paint a couple. Let's take a look.
I worked from a photo and zoomed in on a section in my sketchbook. I made a light pencil outline to the edges of the grapes, then began by mixing a light colour that was a match to the highlight areas on the edges of some of the grapes. I used a really dilute Payne's grey which has a blue hue to it, and I applied it to the very lightest areas where you can hardly see it. To make sure I didn't go over those areas, I mixed a slightly darker version of the Payne's grey, adding in a touch of burnt sienna, a brown, so that it was a more neutral shade of grey, and I applied it everywhere else. I used a small brush so that I wasn't making my paper too wet, and it dried off quickly. This is effectively the light bloom colour on the grapes, and I'm painting it now, not later, because with watercolour you can't paint lighter colours on top of darker ones, so we need to paint the light ones first. I added a browner area where I could see it. Matching the hues is an important part of getting a realistic result. And I left a pale edge to the grape there with just the original very pale wash to it. Then I applied the grey mix to the rest of the grapes. With the lightest tones painted, I made sure the paper was dry and created a mix which was a match to the very darkest tones, again using a mix of Payne's grey and burnt sienna, but this time much thicker and therefore darker. I used an even smaller brush and applied the mix into the very darkest areas, creating feathered edges with little lines with my brush, where that would need to be transitioned into a lighter colour. With my next slightly more watery mix, I could then apply on top of those feathered edges to blend them. I applied this mix in a stippled way using uneven brush strokes to create plenty of texture, which would look similar to the textures of bloom I can see on the grapes. The key thing was to hold off from applying this mix into any areas I thought were lighter in tone as I looked at the reference photo. Then I switched to work on the lighter end of the tonal or value range again and made a mix that was somewhere in between my original mixes and the one I'd just been using. I added a touch of permanent carmine to give the mix a more purplish hue. Now that I'd painted the darkest tones, I could see that a lot of the lighter areas I'd previously painted needed to be made darker to be brought back into balance. I was careful to try to observe and match hues really subtly, so I added in some French ultramarine to the mix in a few places. But again, I made sure that I held off from the very lightest edges. I thickened the mix a touch to work on the mid-tone areas a bit more. This is where the grapes really start to take 3D form as their whole tonal range has been painted. I then let the whole thing completely dry before adding in some more of the detailed little shapes to the grape skin using a mid-consistency mix and my teeniest brush. I was trying to get the general shapes right and the right sort of angles to them rather than faithfully painting each tiny shape. Next, I used a watery and more blue mix to subtly adjust the tones of some lighter areas, and then some mid-tone areas. This adjustment phase is one where, as you get practiced, you can really get lost in the flow of looking back and forth to the reference photo, trying to spot the difference and paint what you see. Next, I added in some more detail and darkened the brown areas. Then I used my thick mix again to add a further layer to much of the darkest tones, including neatening up the edges to several grapes, which really makes them pop forward. Finally, I used some mid-consistency mixes and took my time to make small adjustments to the mid-tones and even the lighter tones. I added more detail as well as neatening edges and blending gently any unwanted hardline edges. This sketchbook paper isn't the best for this type of realism as it's not as absorbent as higher quality 100% cotton paper, but it is possible to layer the paint if you work with a very gentle touch and small brushes so that your paper stays relatively dry. With these final details added, the section of grapes was finished.
Other video classes showing how to paint the rest of this bunch of grapes, together with a traceable line drawing, are available now with Nature Studio membership. If you've enjoyed this mini class, please subscribe to the Nature Studio TV channel, then pop over to naturestudio.com where you can sign up for a set of 4 free classes and find a whole heap of free resources to help you capture the beauty of nature on your paper. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.